All right, so continuing on now with our discussions on Descartes, I wanted to actually make videos on the meditations, and I figured this one will just do maybe the first three, kind of summarize them up and share some thoughts. But obviously, when you go through the famous meditations that Descartes presents to us, we're going to perform a kind of skepticism going all the way back as he reflects through his kind of education. It's also kind of funny to maybe point out how when we were talking about Hobbes a couple weeks ago, that kind of tradition of traveling across Europe to acquire sort of educational and like cultural knowledge. Um, this is kind of funny and kind of contrast to contemporary politics today and some of the egregious and terrible takes that are on the internet. Also, maybe kind of shows how there was that kind of tradition of immigration within Europe, and also the kind of battle that comes out of that. Should it extend outside of Europe or even within it? But anyway, this is a huge digression here. So, what is he really talking about in the first one with deception and things that can get in your sort of way of coming towards the rational conclusion and understanding? And he thinks very little of just sitting around and reading ancient texts to acquire knowledge. Very much so like the kind of empiricist train of thought we've been covering. But, nonetheless, he does delve into the idea of, imagination and the senses, and its sort of distortion or, even something like disease that doesn't really get mentioned enough in these kind of philosophical discussions, how prevalent disease is and how that could distort the senses, as well as obviously Descartes is famous for trying to keep himself warm, but yet he's doubting the existence of his own body and how peculiar that is. But obviously the way he's going to try to bring himself out of this is through his famous "I think therefore I am." But it's actually the sort of performance analysis that really makes sense of this, or the kind of understanding of this kind of simultaneous attitude of the phrase itself. Uttering and casting doubt. As you're doubting your own mind. It's kind of done in tandem and kind of has that kind of cohesive of the kind of performance of truth, which actually kind of really made me think about morality and sort of some of the topics I've been talking about, and kind of the performance of of the good and the performance of truth. And of course, this is in part where you get the radical change in Cartesian thought of the mind activity, and its separation from the kind of Aristotelian way of the intellect and the soul, and how the senses all connect together. There's now this distinct separation and thus problem between the mind and the body that connect modern thought since. And obviously the determination of what the connection is between the mind and what is in the world is one of the most important and profound questions that our civilization is still asking to this day. And so that really is to get at what he's doing with the wax argument. It is that kind of turn away from Aristotelian knowledge of senses and the abstraction of of understanding it, and Descartes coming in and saying that, it's all jumbled and messed up unless you have this kind of perception of the mind and the intellect using its rational conceptions towards information. This is a big, obvious move and defining characteristic of Western thought. And so by the time he gets to being a thinking thing, as it were, he has to then categorize out his kind of ideas of the advantageous, the innate, and then just your simple sort of image ideas, in order to get towards his arguments of God and his, what he thinks of ideas. And so he kind of talks about the fact of, and so out of that sort of perception of knowing that you can understand and get towards, the reality of the qualities, the kind of primary, secondary qualities, if you can do that, then that could be true not just of other things, but demonstrates how outside of your own mind things do exist out there. And so he wants to kind of discern away from the sort of sensible qualities of color, sound, smell, taste, heat, this sort of sensory senses, and focus on the kind of primary shape, force, the kind of Cartesian phase space, as it were. And out of that, he also kind of speculates how, you could doubt and look at your own kind of imperfections, and he obviously also kind of plays with the idea that he himself could be this sort of perfect being in the world himself, but he lays that to rest because of the idea of improvement. Why would you want to improve yourself, or at least see improvement within yourself, unless you weren't perfect? But it's actually out of that he builds towards this argument for God. If we know that we aren't perfect, that there's people out there, peers perhaps, that are better at things than you are, then that sort of awareness, if you will, shows that there has to be some sort of perfect being, because you have a perfect idea, and therefore if you follow his sort of theory of ideas, then there has to be a sort of formal reality at some point of the existence of a perfect being, is really what he's trying to get at by the time you get to the third meditation here. And I suppose that would be the kind of jumping off point that I wanted to have for this video. I just wanted to get through the third meditation here and sort of play with his ideas and the kind of performance of thinking and being a thinking being, and what that means for his morality going forward in Western thought, and that sort of pinpointing and even in a political sense, that kind of I think you could say that it applies to even politics and ethics, in so far that if you're a thinking being in and of it yourself as this sort of reference point, and we see that within art as well, and the artist and its perceptions. This is obviously very heavy and important stuff towards understanding your kind of historical identity, in my opinion, and why this channel is the way it is to begin with. But anyway, I digress. I'm going on far too long here. And obviously the distinction of formal reality, and you may have thoughts, but these thoughts are judged based off of how close they are towards something that's tangible, of objective reality. And so out of that, he tries to take the sort of scholastic course of causality, of, well, if you have the kind of effect, and take for example the kind of stone, or a smaller rock breaking off of a bigger rock, then that would be how you would end up with God, in that kind of almost Aquinas sort of causal approach. And so I guess, just to summarize one more time, Descartes, out of his skepticism of self-doubt, understands himself as a thinking being who defers to the qualities of space to establish his body, and conclude that therefore there are other thinking beings and ideas in the world that he can tap into, beyond just our senses of knowledge, but actually the concepts. And through that, he uses the understanding of wax, and how just the senses alone can't understand the wax for what it actually is, and its changes from within. But yeah, thanks for watching, guys. This is just part one. We'll be doing part two hopefully next week. I really appreciate it. Hope you guys subscribe. But yeah, thanks for watching.